I can hear fine, yeah.
Awesome. I'm Paloma here. You are now on full screen on the big stage. We can now see you and hear you well. So thank you so much for making the time and joining us today. We are looking forward to learn more about Alpha City. So thank you so much for being here.
Of course, of course. Give me 1 second. I need to reopen. Sorry, I haven't shared screen yet. Give me 1 second. I'll be right back.
No problem. So Bradford is doing some very interesting work in Africa. We've been studying a lot the movement he's doing. Has anyone heard of Alpha City before? Okay, so this is going to be exciting for you guys as well. Can you try to screen share?
See my screen now.
Yeah, it looks amazing. So just go to the screen and.
Yeah, I'm seeing.
Perfect. We can hear you and see you well.
Everything's cool?
Yeah.
Great.
Have you been to Brazil before, Bradford?
I have. I love it. I wish I could be there all the time.
So let's book you for next year. I'm putting you up here in public so you commit.
Hopefully this year I can make it time a couple times.
Okay, we will be waiting. But yeah, floor is all yours. Thank you so much for coming.
Cool. And just a quick thing on Brazil, because I know I've talked to Hugo and some others about this. It's such an amazing country for startup cities. I think it's such a huge opportunity, and I really hope that we can see several different projects start to get traction there, because the country needs it. It's an ideal place for it. So I'm really hoping that we can eventually be involved in some projects. In Brazil, we've started in the Portuguese-speaking African countries, which I'll talk about in a second, but Brazil is obviously the holy grail of the Portuguese-speaking world. So I'm so glad to see a community forming around all this stuff down there. It's super exciting. Okay, so talking about Alpha, we've kind of rebranded how we talk about it. We explained that we're engineering high-performance civilization now because we really want to have the sense of a grander vision. As we've gotten into this further and further, we've started to realize that, my background is in AI. I've been working as an AI researcher and then as a CEO and investor all the way back starting in 1999. And so everything that we're seeing now with these major AI advancements is stuff, that I've spent my career working on. And I had obviously thought a lot about how it would redefine government and the state. And having been somebody who's always been passionate about libertarian values and how to think about redesigning government, I think I kind of broke away from working on the technical aspects of AI to working on this back in 2020, in part because I did see that AI and crypto would be a huge opportunity to take these two very powerful primitives and really redesign civilization as a whole, completely rethinking how we do government from scratch. So that's kind of how we look at it. It's a pretty big idea. We think of this like the incremental way to explain it to the rest of the world, because we don't want to talk about a hostile takeover of countries and stuff. That's too scary. Is to talk about startup cities as the next natural evolution from SEZs, right? It's just a higher autonomy SEZ. In our model, cities are just joint ventures with the national governments. The national governments have equity, they have a board seat, and they have revenue share because they're part owners in the joint ventures. We do this very much on purpose to align very long-term incentives, because I do see a world where eventually the vast majority of population, economic activity, and everything important in many countries is migrated into these new private cities. And so in the course of doing that, it has to be in the interests of the government and the interests of the overall population to continue to facilitate this migration. And so they need to be having a seat at the table, they need to have ownership, et cetera. So it's important to think about how to structure the model for longevity. We have a unified special development zone law which can serve as a multi-home jurisdiction. So what that means is that we get every country to pass the same zone law. That allows us to implement things like we'll talk about in a moment, a crypto first digital financial center. We can implement that anywhere we have an alpha city under the zone law policy that we have. We simply have to do some additional agreements with the central banks and so on to make it a real first class financial center. And then we have cities that are a combination of what we call core districts and portal districts. What that means is like core districts is more bottom-up stuff, agriculture, tourism, logistics, things that create huge number of jobs and really develop an economy from the bottom up. Because remember, we're partnering a lot with relatively poor countries. And I think you'll see the same in a country like Brazil. Brazil is very large. In many ways, Brazil is kind of similar to a lot of parts of Africa, in fact, right? You have some really big cities. You have like Sao Paulo is kind of like a New York. Rio, needs a lot of love. It's a beautiful place, but economically it needs a lot of love. But if you drive just an hour or 2 hours outside these cities, you can see villages that are completely falling apart from old colonial times. It looks exactly like driving around Portuguese colonial Africa. Same people, same genetics even, same circumstances economically, same environment, it's the same. In fact, when you look at Angola, it's literally the same land, right? I'm sure you guys know, prehistorically, if you zipper together the coast of Brazil and Angola, that's what it was like. It was a single continent. It's literally the same land unit. So there's a huge amount of similarity. And I think a lot of the same stuff is needed in Brazil, even though there is a big agricultural industry, obviously, that's been hugely successful. There used to be a very similar agricultural industry in Angola, actually. It was destroyed primarily because of the decades-long civil war. But that's going to be coming back now. But even in Brazil, there's a huge need for a lot of these bottom-up industries to develop and take a lot of people out of poverty. There's a lot of poverty still around, even though it's a developing country. Many of the even poorer countries, they need this, 10, 20 years ago, they needed this. Nothing's happening. So the first thing that's most important for all of us to think about, in my opinion, when we're thinking about building these high autonomy new startup cities, is that the places where you can do it are probably going to be poor or at least developing and less well off. And so just coming in with some techno utopia vision for the rich is not really the right vibe, I don't think. I think you need to be thinking top down and bottom up. So the core districts are the bottom up. And then the portal districts are the top down. The autonomy that we can get through solving these bottom up economic development problems in the core districts is going to allow us to create new places for people to move branch offices and start new businesses in some of the world's most important and most regulated industries. Examples are like crypto and financial services, AI. Obviously, we've all seen in the news lately in the US, all the crazy misguided stuff on AI. The funniest one I've seen the past week is one of these activists who doesn't want to have any data centers. Of course, they don't know the economics of the data centers and that they're actually very net positive for the communities where data centers are built. Anyways, this one girl was researching on ChatGPT how to go and stop people from, building these data centers. So I don't think the irony of that is lost on any of us, and it wasn't even lost on her. These folks are very confused, just as always with the far left. It's just all about a culture of hate and trying to stop things because people don't feel good about themselves and their own place in the world. So they just want to try to block everything. And I think that's really important for these new startup cities because to the extent that we see the West stuck in that mode, it's going to continue to drive a diaspora of top talent and companies that want to look for new jurisdictions, either to move themselves right away in full or to have a backup plan, right? Like we've talked to a lot of crypto firms about this because for now it's semi-okay under the current administration, but if we see the US make a big pivot back to the left again with a psychopathic far left almost socialist kind of person. Like, we have a straight up socialist mayor of New York City right now in the US. That's horrifying, especially I think to you Brazilians who have seen decades of seesawing back and forth between these kinds of psychopaths. It's horrifying to see that creeping in. And it makes people want to have a backup plan, just like many Brazilians have a backup plan, where they have bank accounts and stuff in other jurisdictions, right? Because they want to have, in case things get really bad, they want to have an escape hatch before they get trapped. I think that's going to be the case for a lot of these portal districts where people are saying, okay, we're not going to, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, X, these guys are not going to move all of their data center operations and their AI staff to go to Nigeria or Kenya, of course. But would they have a secondary branch office there and maybe like a backup plan there? Yeah, I think we could get that to happen. And it's the same for crypto firms. Market opportunity we're trying to address. Africa is just growing a lot, right? It's going to grow its GDP a lot. So if you can capture a percentage of that, it's huge. So that's one simple argument. The other one is just like the businesses, the 100 million plus businesses that are in these over-regulated sectors that are looking for, a place to move that can be lower friction and lower cost for them to operate. So those are the two big kind of tailwinds that we feel like we have from doing this. Business model is pretty simple. There's 4 reinforcing layers to it. Number one is land. We usually are, when we're partnering with the country, we're getting big land concessions. And then we obviously upvalue that land a lot through building a master plan, zoning it, bringing people in, developing it. So we gain a lot of equity value through the appreciation of the land. Second is operations. Obviously, there's a lot of core infrastructure, utilities, license, basic services. We're building all of our own software, so we'll talk about that in a second. Any kind of licensing or administrative operations or whatever, even stuff around the big core industries like in our digital financial center, all that's done with software and APIs. We're not going to be operating off of a taxation model. We're going to explore what it would look like for government to run like a SaaS revenue model, where you have to pay for services. You get the corporations to pay in particular for services that they use, and you don't tax anyone, whether it be individuals or companies. Which is how it was in the beginning of the US, right? In the beginning of the US, there was no taxes. All the infrastructure was built by the rich and their companies, right? And I think that makes sense. So this idea that you see a lot of people on the left now are like, oh, the rich should pay their fair share, whatever else. In fact, actually, they're kind of right in a way, but not in the way they think. It should be that nobody pays any tax at all, and that we get rid of all the politicians and their attempts to redistribute wealth and their attempts to execute on infrastructure projects when they're incompetent at execution. And we should simply ask these people, who are actually mostly pretty benevolent, to do it. That's what I told a bunch of my friends in California. Like, if you put me in charge of California and asked me, what would you do about this whole billionaires problem and fixing California's issues? I would say I would chop the government down to almost nothing, just kill it so hard. I would just crush it beyond anyone's belief of how badly you could crush it. And then I would ask all the billionaires, hey guys, I want you to all put a chunk of wealth into a fund. And some of you have to be on the hook for actually executing some of this shit, because you're the smartest people we've got. You're the best execution people we've got. We got a high-speed rail problem. We've got homelessness problem, drug addiction problem. We got corruption all over the place and all these crazy things. I want each of you to incubate different ventures that are funded out of this fund and go fix this shit. That's how we built the US in the first place. The smartest people that were the best at executing and had all the resources are the ones that built all the infrastructure and everything. So in that sense, the quote unquote rich paying their fair share makes sense. Like, the most successful people, the most successful companies should actually be the ones building the infrastructure for everybody else to subsist off of. I actually agree with that. But we should have them do it, not take the money away from the people who are good and give it away to people who suck at execution and are corrupt. Why on earth would we do that? Just give it to Elon. I'll have Elon build the California high-speed rail. That shit will be done, right? That's what makes sense. And then lastly, like ventures, we'll JV hierarchically down the stack. We're not going to develop everything ourselves, obviously. So we'll bring in top hotel chains to develop some of the hotels. We'll bring in tons of financial services firms for that part. We have EV City. We'll bring in people like Tesla. We'll have all kinds of different partners and many joint ventures with them. And so we have other equity appreciation upside there. Traction so far, the first cohort that we did the first couple of years were these 3 islands off the coast of West Africa, Sao Tome, Cabo Verde, Guinea-Bissau. Those are the 3 Lusophone countries that are smaller. And then we started at Angola, but that's really happening now in the second cohort. Those 3, by the way, it's all going to be kind of lifestyle resorts, but also these like offshore financial center model. And the second cohort is big scale stuff. So Angola, Nigeria, Kenya, Tanzania, these are all big EV cities, AI cities, and possibly aerospace, which I'll talk about in a moment. All right. So technology and governance, how do we see this working together? So as I said in the beginning, like I'm a technologist, I come from AI, I've been a crypto believer from early. So like this is how I think about things, is building a new form of government that uses these primitives and rethinks everything. So policy should all be designed with AI. We shouldn't have politicians. Politicians make no sense anymore. I don't view politics as being necessary for governance. I view it as an obsolete construct, which should be done away with. So we don't believe in politics. We don't want politicians. We don't think it's needed. We don't want policy makers. I firmly disagree with the idea that that's required and there's fuzziness and you need these people. Completely disagree. We're going to do it all with AI. I do it all myself. I had lawyers before, many lawyers that we've spent lots of money on over the years, and now I do it all myself. And I don't plan to have anyone else do that until we get to a certain point and I can take someone under my wing and sort of train them up on how I've done it, because obviously as somebody who's worked with AI so long, I have very advanced ways of working with the tools, and I think that's really the right way to define the future of policymaking. When it comes to operations, again, everything is carried out through AI-enabled software, permits, filings, whatever. Everything is just submitted by a software and processed with AI with a very thin, like human layer for managing exceptional cases in case something is flagged as, hey, this is very risky. We're not entirely sure what to decide on this. We'll have little, of course, review committees. Markets as democracy and decentralized banking. So all the stuff a central bank would do is replaced by the crypto ecosystem and markets, right? Currencies, interest rates, contracts, etc. And also when it comes to voice and policy administration, like notions of democracy are also replaced by things like DAOs and so on, right? We don't want to have a normal democratic system. I think the democratic system that we have in the West is obsolete. And it's one of these sacred cows that people are afraid to challenge. Okay, so just recapping, the markets as democracy and decentralized banking. My point was like, we need to question democracy. It's not clear, like the idea that people should have a voice is correct, right? And people should have a choice where they live and what policies they live under. Completely agree. But the mechanisms of modern Western democracy, it should be challenged. It's like saying, hey, we're not going to use actually any of the Claude Code stuff, guys. We're just going to manually write everything in COBOL instead, right? Well, why would we do that? Why does that? It makes no sense, right? But when it comes to legal and policy, we're stuck, right? As I was saying before I got cut off, a lot of my ancestors wrote a lot of this stuff, right? I'm named after William Bradford, who was the governor of Plymouth Plantation, who came with 16 of my ancestors on the Mayflower to the U.S. in 1620. My John Adams and John Quincy Adams, presidents number 2 and number 6 of the U.S., are also my grandfathers. John Adams, the first one, he's the one who wrote the Massachusetts State Constitution, which is the predominant input, into the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Constitution is what all the European constitutions are based on, which is in turn what the constitutions of the rest of the world, after they became democratic, are based on. So your constitution and the Constitution of Portugal are based on the constitutions written by my grandfather. And it was a long time ago, and I think if we could go back in time and talk to this guy and say, hey, we're still using the same shit, I think they would be like, hey, why don't you consider making some changes and update it? Like, this thing was envisioned when we were riding around on horses, right? Some of it might not make sense anymore. Let's revisit it. And we don't do that enough. So I think the idea that everyone should have a say and that we're not living in a totalitarian regime is very valid. But there's many ways to do that and rethink that. And that's the point for us of startup cities, is to have a laboratory for experimenting with new ways to implement governance that doesn't involve politics and that doesn't involve the kind of stultifying bureaucracy that modern democratic systems seem to evidence. We see it, you see it in Brazil, you know how bad it is in Brazil. We see it in California. California is absolutely horrible. There's layers and layers and layers and layers of voting on so many different things that at the end of the day, even if you did elect a really good politician, it's nearly impossible for them to get anything done and get major change done. That's why, for me, what Milei's been able to do in Argentina is just shocking. It makes it unfathomable to understand how good of a leader this man must be in order to get all this stuff done in a country like Argentina. It's like a once in a generation level of leadership to be able to pull that kind of a thing off, because it's so hard in these democratic systems with so much bureaucracy and so much voting up and down so many levels of hierarchy. So that's very impressive. But it would be even more impressive to design some other new systems that aren't so dysfunctional. So that's what we hope we can do. Lastly, corporate and internet-inspired structure and accountability. The purpose of democracy, a big part of it, is supposed to be for accountability, but instead we have these career political elites that never seem to get voted out and always seem to be floating around. You guys have Lula back again. He just keeps lurking around somehow, right? Well, we already have a better model, I think, of accountability with corporations, with the CEO and the board and shareholders and how that all works together. And I think structurally, the committee-based approaches that we've seen in open source on places with kind of standards like the W3C and various big-scale open source projects, that stuff has scaled better than anything in the history of mankind. So we should be looking at these other models, taking ideas from these other models, not only taking ideas from historical, political, democratic systems. We should be innovating and looking at new ways of doing it that are inspired from other places that seem to be functioning better in some ways. And then last, I'll just go through this really quick so we can have a little time for Q&A. This is just kind of getting into detail on some of our different cities. So Cabo Verde, that's the first place we're working on doing the digital financial center. It'll be crypto, but also neobanks, any kind of TradFi as well. Everyone's going to be welcome there. The whole point is to have something like Dubai International Financial Center, but is fully privatized, and the regulator is all software and AI, right? I've actually built an AI startup for anti-money laundering and know your customer inside some of the world's biggest banks back in 2015 to 2017 timeframe. So I know a lot about this and have a ton of contacts in that space. And what we want to do is implement this stuff as a hub. So when you come and register a financial institution in our jurisdiction, it's all digital. It's all AI based. How we read your application and approve it or not approve it. in terms of how you file suspicious activity reports, even how you run your know your customer onboarding for people. We want you to use the software from an anonymized hub. We want that to be the revenue model for the financial center. No tax, no complexity of everyone having to re-implement all their own compliance systems. Just use a centralized, highly efficient AI-based compliance system, and that's going to be the revenue model and the bridge between the central bank and all the financial institutions coming here. So that's how that's going to work. Sao Tome, we want to do the exact same thing with the central bank there. In both of these two places, we also want a heavy lifestyle focus. Cabo Verde is more of an Ibiza style, desert kind of vibe. Sao Tome is very, very lush, more of a Bali type of vibe. So we see a lot of really good luxury vacationing and stuff like that in these places. Kenya is going to have the world's leading source of low-cost green energy for the foreseeable future because of the East African Rift Valley and the ability to generate massive geothermal at scale. And so we see that as a great place to build these big AI data centers and build one of our AI university concepts. We want to do them here and in Nigeria. The AI university concept is something I've thought about all the way back to undergrad. The point is, AI is so transformative that it's going to change every single field and how we learn every field. And so going forward, for any STEM major, your first 2 years of school should be computational and learning about software and AI and everything. And then your last 2 years, you go out into your vertical major, materials or chemistry or bio or medicine, anything like that. You still do computing first, and then you go out into your field. And the whole thing, of course, the instructional model, like the pedagogical model, everything will be totally different and totally based on AI. And then at the end of it, when it comes to research, every school will have its own robotic automated research lab, because the reason that LLMs are so good right now for text and video and everything is, of course, that we have the internet data, right? But we need to generate data at that scale for all these other domains in order to be able to perform like that with modern deep learning models in all the other domains. We will be able to do this. Robotics is ready. The tech is ready. We just need to build huge gigafactory scale labs for every domain. And that's how researchers are going to carry out all their experimentation and work on things in the future. That's how we're going to see like crazy cures to all kinds of diseases and physics breakthroughs and everything over the next decade. I'm very certain we'll see that happen really fast. Lagos is basically the same thing, just a different spin on it with AI University. Angola, and then we're also going to look at doing the same thing in Tanzania. These are the two output ports of these huge critical mineral belt in Central Africa, where it has all the critical minerals used for solid state batteries and all the EV components. So we want to build these huge cities along the rail corridors, because that's going to be Africa's big first transcontinental rail corridor from Lobito in Angola all the way up to Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. There'll be many cities along the way refining all the minerals and making different kinds of products in the supply chain. And then down near the ports, we want to have eventually full-scale vehicle assembly. And then eventually in Angola and Sao Tome on West Africa, and then also in Kenya and East Africa, we'd love to do aerospace cities, so drones, space launch, etc. These are a couple of the only remaining perfect equatorial launch sites on Earth that are like massively underexploited. It would be economically very, very beneficial for everyone to launch a lot more rockets from these two sites. And so they also have very high proximity to cheap liquid natural gas, which is the precursor to methane used in the modern large-scale rockets. So these are examples of kind of leaping into the future big high-value industries and bringing that into these same places where we're going to be, growing bananas or doing other very basic stuff. So that's it. I'll stop here and give you guys whatever time we have left for Q&A.
So Bradford, unfortunately, we're already 10 minutes past. And of course, those technical issues, but we went a little over. I do want to invite everybody to maybe post it on X, the questions. And I know you're active there. Maybe you can answer on X.
That's fine.
Thank you so much for your time and for coming. We're so excited to host you here in Brazil. I agree with you. Floripa is much better than Rio and São Paulo. I don't know if you saw our quote of this year's IP City is "Quit your job, prompt a new city." So I think it's very on title to everything you just said. And I'm like, oh my God, AI is like crazy, right? You've been doing it all by yourself. So I just want to say congratulations. This is just madness. And I love when it blows my mind like that. So thank you so much. I think from all of us here, we're very excited to learn more. And we will send you the messages on X.
Okay, thank you very much, guys. See you.